The sneaker was small enough to fit in one hand. Blue, with white stripes. A grass stain on the left toe from the last afternoon they spent together in the backyard. Grant Mercer stood in his son's bedroom at 3 a.m, holding that sneaker like it was the last fragment of a world that was slipping away from him. The room was exactly as Caleb had left it. Race car posters on the walls. A half-built Lego spaceship on the desk, abandoned mid-construction, because Caleb had wanted to show his father something outside. A stuffed dog named Biscuit, propped against the pillow, waiting for a boy who might never come home to hold him again. Every man has one thing he would burn his empire down to keep. Grant Mercer was about to lose his. 14 days. That is how long Grant had been living inside a nightmare that no amount of money could wake him from. 14 days since Caleb collapsed in the garden without warning. 14 days since paramedics rushed his 7-year-old son to Hargrove Medical Center, where the best neurologists in the country examined him, tested him, and ultimately failed him. Grant stood now in a private consultation room on the 4th floor. Dr. Nadia Osei sat across from him, her hands folded on the table, her eyes carrying the weight of words she did not want to speak. The scans show persistent brain activity. She paused, choosing her phrasing carefully. But it is locked in a pattern we have never encountered before. It is not a coma in the traditional sense. It is not a seizure. It is not any condition we have documented in medical literature. Grant's voice came out flat, hollow. What does that mean for my son? Dr. Osei held his gaze with a steadiness that told him she had delivered impossible news before. But that did not make this moment any easier. It means we have exhausted every intervention available to us. His body is stable, but his mind is unreachable. I am so sorry, Mr. Mercer, but I think it is time we begin discussing end-of-life options. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Grant did not cry. He did not shout. He simply looked at her with eyes that had gone somewhere far away and said, "Give me 24 hours." His voice was so quiet that it frightened her more than tears ever could have. The private waiting room was a cathedral of silence. Marble floors, fresh flowers in crystal vases that Grant had paid for because he could not stand the smell of hospital antiseptic. Leather chairs that cost more than most people earned in a month. None of it mattered. None of it could bring his son back. Grant sat alone, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. The empire he had built over 2 decades meant nothing inside these walls. The buildings with his name on them, the magazine covers, the influence that could move markets and shape policy. All of it was worthless paper compared to the small body lying in the room down the hall. Marcus Chen entered quietly. He was Grant's head of security, a man who had been by his side for 14 years and had seen him at his lowest. He carried a paper cup of coffee that Grant would not drink and set it on the table beside him. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say. After a long moment, Marcus cleared his throat. "Sir, there is something I need to tell you." Grant did not look up. "There is a boy outside. He has been there since yesterday morning. Security has tried to move him along 3 times, but he keeps coming back." Grant's response was automatic, dismissive. "Pay him to leave." Marcus hesitated. "That was the first thing we tried." He would not take it. Now Grant looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but sharp. "What do you mean he would not take it?" "I mean, exactly that. We offered him $200 to go find somewhere else to sleep. He refused. He said he was not there for money. He said he was there because he knows how to help your son." Grant stared at his most trusted employee for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a terrible sound, broken and bitter. "So he is a con artist, with patience. Call the police. Have him removed." Marcus did not move. "Sir, I have seen a lot of people try to get to you over the years. Gold diggers, scammers, Desperate parents wanting donations. This boy is different. I cannot explain it, but something about him is different. I think you should see him for yourself. Grant wanted to refuse. He wanted to retreat back into his grief and wait for the inevitable. But something in Marcus's voice gave him pause. In 14 years, Marcus had never asked him to do anything based on instinct alone. 20 minutes later, Grant Mercer stepped outside the hospital for the first time in 2 weeks. The afternoon light felt aggressive after so many days under fluorescent tubes. Grant squinted against it, scanning the area near the entrance until his eyes landed on a figure sitting cross-legged on the concrete near a concrete planter. The boy was young, 10 years old at most. His jacket was at least 2 sizes too big, swallowing his thin frame. His sneakers were held together with duct tape. His dark hair was unwashed but neatly combed, as if he still cared about dignity despite his circumstances. And in his lap, he held a worn sketchbook, the pages soft from use. Grant approached, slowly. The boy did not look up. His attention was fixed on whatever he was drawing, his hand moving in small, precise strokes. Grant stopped a few feet away and looked down at the page. The breath left his lungs like he had been struck. The drawing was a boy. A young boy with messy brown hair and wide, curious eyes. A cowlick at the crown of his head, and near his left eyebrow, a small curved scar. Grant's son, unmistakably. His voice turned dangerous when he finally spoke. "Who showed you a picture of my son?" The boy looked up for the first time. His eyes were calm, unafraid. The eyes of someone who had learned long ago that fear was a luxury he could not afford. "Nobody showed me anything. I see him when I sleep. He keeps saying he can't find the door." Grant felt the ground shift beneath him. This was manipulation. It had to be. Some elaborate scheme to extort money from a desperate father. He had seen every trick, every angle, every way that predators tried to exploit the wealthy and the grieving. But no one outside that hospital room knew about the scar near Caleb's left eyebrow. It had happened 18 months ago on a private vacation in Costa Rica. Caleb had tripped on a hiking trail and caught his brow on a sharp rock. Grant had carried him a mile back to their rental house, blood soaking through the cloth he pressed to the wound. There were no photographers, no staff, no witnesses, except Grant and his son. It was never documented anywhere. "How do you know about the scar?" Grant's voice had lost its edge. Now it was something closer to desperation. The boy shrugged. "I told you. I see him. He shows me things." Inside the hospital lobby, a nurse passing by glanced through the glass doors and shook her head. "Another one," she muttered to her colleague. "They come out of the woodwork when they smell money. You watch. He will be selling miracle water by tomorrow." A reporter who had been camped near the entrance for days waiting for an update on the Mercer boy pulled out his phone, sensing a potential story. Grant ignored all of them. He crouched down until he was at eye level with the child. Up close, he could see the details that television cameras would never catch. The old bruise fading on the boy's jaw. The careful way he held his sketchbook, as if it was the most valuable thing he owned. The hunger in his cheeks that he was clearly trying to hide. "What is your name?" "Eli." "Eli. What do you want in return?" Grant asked it plainly. Not as an accusation, but as a genuine question. Everyone wanted something. That was the first lesson wealth taught you. Eli considered the question with surprising seriousness. His brow furrowed. His fingers tightened on his sketchbook. When he answered, his voice was smaller than before. "I want to not be left behind again." The words landed somewhere deep in Grant's chest, in a place he thought he had walled off years ago. He stayed crouched there for a long moment, looking at this impossible boy, this ragged child who spoke of visions and asked only not to be abandoned. Everything Grant knew about the world told him to walk away. to protect himself from fraud and manipulation, to guard what little hope he had left. But Caleb was dying, and every doctor had given up. What did Grant have left to lose? If you were standing where Grant was standing right now, would you let this boy into that hospital room? Would you bet everything on the word of a homeless child you had never met? Think about it honestly. Then drop your answer in the comments, because what happens next is going to change everything. Every protocol said no. Every lawyer would have screamed in protest. Dr. Osei herself stepped into the hallway when Grant approached with Eli and blocked the door with polite but firm resistance. Mr. Mercer, I understand you are grasping for any possibility. Believe me, I wish I could offer you one. But allowing an unvetted minor into a critical patient's room creates liability issues and potentially exposes your son to additional risk. Grant looked at her. His eyes were calm, certain. In a way, they had not been in 2 weeks. My son is dying. Your own words, doctor. Every intervention has failed. You are recommending I begin saying goodbye. He gestured to Eli, who stood silently beside him, clutching his sketchbook. This boy knew about a scar on Caleb's face that no one outside our family has ever seen. He described it perfectly. So either he has some ability I cannot explain, or I have already lost my mind entirely. Either way, I have nothing left to lose. Let him in. Dr. Osei held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. The room was too quiet. That was what struck Eli first. The machines hummed softly. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. But underneath all that electronic sound, there was a silence so heavy it felt like walking into a held breath. Caleb lay in the center of the bed, looking smaller than any 7-year-old should look. Tubes and wires connected him to a dozen machines. His skin was pale. His eyes were closed. He looked like he was sleeping, except that no sleeper had ever been this still. Eli approached the bed slowly. He did not look at the machines. He did not look at the screens displaying brain activity and heart rate and oxygen levels. He looked only at Caleb. Then he reached out and took the unconscious boy's hand. No one in the room moved. Grant stood near the door, his arms crossed tight against his chest, caught between desperate hope and the certainty that he was being a fool. Dr. Osei watched from the corner, her scientific mind at war with her human heart. Marcus remained in the hallway, unable to bring himself to enter. Eli began to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper, so soft that no one else could make out the words. He leaned close to Caleb's ear and kept talking in that low, steady murmur. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Grant felt the foolishness beginning to calcify into disappointment. Then Dr. Osei made a sound, a small, sharp intake of breath. Grant turned to look at her. Her eyes were fixed on the brain activity monitor. Her face had gone pale. The pattern, she breathed. The locked pattern. It is changing. Grant crossed the room in 3 strides and stared at the screen. He could not read it the way she could, but he could see the difference. The static, repetitive waveforms that had persisted for 14 days were transforming, shifting, as if something deep inside his son's mind was waking up. Eli was still holding Caleb's hand, still whispering. His eyes were closed now, his face serene and focused, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Then he opened his eyes and looked directly at Grant. His voice was normal volume now, clear and certain. He told me to tell you something. He said, you would know it was real. Grant's mouth went dry. What did he say? Eli did not blink. He said he remembers the song you sang on the roof. The world stopped. The roof. The night after the funeral. Grant's wife Elena had died giving birth to Caleb, and for weeks afterward, Grant had been unable to do anything but function. Go through motions, sign papers, shake hands with mourners. He was a ghost in an expensive suit. Then one night, 2-year-old Caleb could not sleep. He kept crying, reaching for a mother who would never hold him again. And Grant, at the end of his own endurance, had carried his son up to the rooftop terrace of their penthouse. They sat under the stars, just the two of them. And Grant, who had not sung since he was a child himself, found himself humming a lullaby his own mother had sung to him decades ago. He did not know all the words. His voice cracked on the notes. But Caleb stopped crying and looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. And eventually, he fell asleep in his father's arms. Grant had never told anyone about that night. Not his closest friends. Not his therapist. Not Marcus. It was the single most private moment of his entire life. And now this boy who lived on the streets had just described it perfectly. Grant's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the rail of Caleb's bed to steady himself. When he looked at Eli again, the question came out as a broken whisper. How? How is this possible? Eli shook his head slowly. I do not know. I just know that I see him. I always have, since I was little. He is in my dreams, and I am in his. We talk. We play. He did not know I was real, and I did not know he was real, until I saw his picture on the news. Grant stared at this impossible child, and somewhere beneath his shock, beneath his desperation, beneath his grief, another feeling began to rise. Something that felt terribly like recognition. The hours that followed were a blur of medical tests and hushed consultations. Caleb's vitals had stabilized. The locked brain pattern had broken. Dr. Oze could not explain any of it, but she could document it, and documentation meant hope. Eli had fallen asleep in the chair beside Caleb's bed, exhausted by whatever had passed between them. His sketchbook had slipped from his fingers onto the floor. His hand still rested near Caleb's, not quite touching but close. Grant stood in the hallway, staring through the window at the two boys. His mind was racing through territory he did not want to enter. Marcus appeared beside him. The older man's face was troubled. His jaw was tight. Marcus, Grant said, without looking away from the window. Is there anything about this boy you are not telling me? The silence stretched too long. Grant turned to face his head of security, the man who had been his shadow for 14 years, the man who knew every secret Grant had ever tried to bury. Marcus could not meet his eyes. Tell me, Grant said, and his voice carried the weight of command that had built empires and destroyed competitors. Marcus closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt he had carried for a decade. 11 years ago, when Elena was pregnant. There were complications that the doctors did not want to discuss publicly. Grant's blood went cold. What kind of complications? Marcus, finally, looked at him. There were 2 heartbeats, sir. The doctors detected a second child. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Grant's feet. He braced one hand against the wall. Marcus continued, his words coming faster now, as if he had been waiting years to release them. The pregnancy was failing. Elena was dying. The doctors told you privately that both babies might not survive, and you had to make an impossible choice. You chose to prioritize the stronger twin, the baby who became Caleb. Grant's vision was narrowing. His heart was slamming against his ribs. No, I would remember. You were in shock, sir. Elena had just died. You were not sleeping. You were barely functioning. The doctor gave you options, and you made a decision under unimaginable stress. The second child was premature, fragile. The doctors were not optimistic about his survival, and you could not face keeping him. You could not look at him without seeing everything you had lost. Marcus's voice cracked. You asked me to handle it, quietly, privately, through an attorney you trusted. The child was placed with a young woman who could not afford the proper legal channels. It was meant to be a closed adoption, but she could not keep him either. From there, The trail goes cold. Group homes. Foster placements. The streets. Grant's back hit the wall. He slid down until he was sitting on the cold hospital floor. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. All these years. His voice was barely audible. I had another son, and I threw him away. You were broken, sir. You made an impossible choice in an impossible moment. I am not saying it was right. I'm saying I understood why. Grant looked through the window at Eli, at this scrappy, hungry, brilliant child who drew pictures of a brother he had never met, who refused money because all he wanted was to not be left behind. A child Grant himself had abandoned. I want you to sit with this for a second, because what Grant did was wrong. There is no way around that. He chose one son and discarded the other. He paid people to make a child disappear. But can you understand how a broken man might make a broken choice? Can you imagine the kind of grief that makes you do things you can never take back? Tell me in the comments what you think, because this story is about to hit different. Grant returned to the room. Eli was still sleeping, his thin chest rising and falling with the deep breath of childhood exhaustion. In sleep, his face was peaceful, unguarded. He looked like any other 10-year-old who had not spent half his life on the streets. Grant sat down across from him and waited. Eventually, Eli's eyes opened. They focused immediately on Grant, with the wariness of someone who had learned to wake fast and assess danger faster. Grant did not move. He kept his voice low and even. Eli, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Eli sat up slowly, pulling his knees to his chest, watching, waiting. Grant told him everything. He did not soften it. He did not make excuses. He told Eli about Elena's death, about the impossible choice, about the fear and the grief and the cowardice had made him turn away from his own child. He told Eli about the attorney and the informal placement and the deliberate blindness that followed. When he finished, the room was silent, except for the steady beep of Caleb's heart monitor. Eli sat very still. His face was unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady in a way that made Grant's chest ache. So you knew I existed? Yes. And you gave me away? Yes. Eli looked at Caleb, still unconscious but stable. His brother, his twin, the boy who had everything Eli never had. Does he know about me? Not yet. Another pause. Will you tell him the truth? Grant met the boy's eyes. He saw no anger there, only a weary acceptance that no child should ever carry. Yes, every word of it. I will tell him exactly what I did, and I will let him decide how he feels about me after. Eli considered this. His fingers traced the edge of his worn sketchbook. What happens to me now? Grant leaned forward. His voice cracked for the first time. I cannot undo what I did 11 years ago. I cannot give you back the childhood you deserved. I cannot make any of this right. But I am asking you. I am begging you. Give me the chance to try. Let me be your father. For real. This time. Let me spend the rest of my life earning what I should have given you from the beginning. Eli did not answer immediately. He looked at Caleb again, then back at Grant, the other kids, the ones like me, on the streets, in the group homes. Will you help them too? Grant felt tears sliding down his face. He did not wipe them away. Yes, every one I can reach. I promise. Eli uncurled slowly from his protective posture. He looked at this broken billionaire, this father who had failed him completely, this man who was finally trying to do right. Okay, he said quietly. I will stay. 2 days later, Caleb opened his eyes. The first thing he did, before he spoke, before he cried, before he registered the machines and the hospital room and the strange surroundings, was turn his head to the side. His eyes found Eli immediately, as if he had known exactly where to look. They stared at each other, two halves of a whole that had been separated before they could even remember. Is that him? Caleb's voice was hoarse from disuse, but the wonder in it was unmistakable. Grant stood at the foot of the bed, his heart hammering. Yes, that is him. Caleb's face broke into a smile so pure that it hurt to look at. I knew you were real. I knew it. You helped me find the door. Eli's composure finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears he had trained himself never to shed. You heard me. I always heard you, Caleb said. I just did not know how to reach you until now. Right here. This is the moment. Two brothers who were never supposed to find each other, finding each other anyway. If this story is hitting you the way it is hitting me, take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. Stories like this are what we do here, every single week. The DNA test was merely a formality. Grant already knew the truth in his bones, but he needed the documentation for what came next. He did not hide what he had done. Against every piece of advice from his legal team, against Marcus's worried protests, against the instincts that had helped him build his fortune, Grant Mercer chose transparency. He met with child welfare officials and attorneys and adoption specialists. He laid out the entire ugly truth of what had happened 11 years ago. He submitted himself to investigations and background checks and home visits. He did not try to buy his way past the process. When reporters finally caught wind of the story, he did not spin it. He released a single statement that took full responsibility for his choices and their consequences. Eli, meanwhile, was adapting to a life he had never imagined. His own bedroom, 3 meals a day. A brother who wanted to be with him constantly. It was overwhelming in ways that sometimes made him retreat to corners and wrap his arms around himself until the strangeness passed. But Caleb would not let him stay withdrawn for long. The 7-year-old had decided that having a brother was the greatest gift the universe had ever given him, and he intended to make up for 10 years of separation in record time. Show me how you draw like that. Teach me to draw the dreams. Can we share a room? Instead, do you want the top bunk or the bottom bunk? What is your favorite food? Mine is macaroni and cheese, but the orange kind, not the fancy kind. Eli learned to smile again. Not the guarded, careful smile he had perfected for adults who might give him food or shelter. A real smile. The kind that started in his chest and worked its way up until it crinkled the corners of his eyes. Before we reach the ending, I want to ask you something real. What would you have done if you were Eli? Would you have forgiven Grant? Would you have walked away from everything he was offering, just to protect yourself from being hurt again? There is no wrong answer, but I want to hear yours. Drop it in the comments. Grant made good on his promise. The Mercer Foundation for Missing Children launched 6 months after Eli came home. It funded better tracking systems for kids lost in the fragmented placement network. It provided legal resources for families trying to reunify. It built shelters and schools and programs designed to catch children before they fell through the cracks. Eli himself insisted on being involved. He met with other kids who had lived on the streets. He told them his story. He made them believe that being forgotten did not have to be permanent. Ruth Holloway, the elderly woman who had helped raise Eli on and off for 2 years, was found and brought to the Mercer home. She wept when she saw how healthy Eli looked. She accepted a cottage on the property and a role helping with the foundation's outreach programs. She finally stopped worrying about the boy who had always been too kind for the cruel world he had been born into. Dr. Oze published a paper on Caleb's recovery. She was careful to present only the medical facts, but in private, she admitted to Grant that some things could not be explained by science. Some things just were. And Marcus, the man who had helped Grant bury his greatest shame, finally found peace in watching him try to make it right. 6 months after everything changed, on a cool evening when the sky was just beginning to darken, Eli stood on the rooftop terrace of his new home. Below, through the glass windows, he could see Caleb inside, arguing passionately with the housekeeper about whether they should get a dog. The debate had been ongoing for weeks, and Eli was fairly certain the housekeeper was about to lose. Grant appeared beside him. He did not say anything, at first. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out over the city lights beginning to flicker on. Caleb said something interesting today. Eli's voice was thoughtful. Grant glanced at him. What did he say? He said, "You sing badly." Grant almost smiled. It was the first genuine humor he had felt in longer than he could remember. He is not wrong. Eli turned to look at him. His face was serious in that way he had. Too old for his years, but learning to be young again. Will you sing it anyway? Sometime. The roof song. Grant looked at this boy. His son. His failure. His second chance. The child he had thrown away, who had somehow found his way back and saved everything Grant loved most. He did not answer with words. He started to sing. His voice was terrible, cracking on the high notes, forgetting half the words. But he sang anyway. The lullaby his mother had sung to him. The lullaby he had sung to Caleb. In the darkest moment of his grief. The lullaby that now belonged to both his sons under an open sky. Eli listened, and somewhere in the middle of that awful, beautiful singing, he leaned slightly against his father's side. Grant put an arm around his shoulders and kept singing. Some doors we close in fear. We lock them tight and throw away the key and convince ourselves that whatever is on the other side is better left alone. But some doors find their own way open. Some connections are too strong to stay broken. And sometimes, in the most impossible and unexplainable ways, the people we failed the most are the very ones who come back to save us. Grant Mercer learned that the hard way. Eli learned that he was worth saving. And Caleb learned that the brother from his dreams had been real all along. 3 lives, 2 chances, 1 family that almost never was, and a song on a rooftop that finally sounded like home.